The X-ray plate is labeled Liverpool Series G, Exposure 4, dated March 1968. It shows the skull of Tutankhamun in lateral profile, the same skull Douglas Derry had examined in 1925 without the benefit of radiography, and it shows something Derry could not have seen. At the base of the skull, in the region where the cervical vertebrae meet the occipital bone, a fragment of loose bone sits inside the cranial cavity. It is roughly the size of a fingernail. It is not attached to any surface. It sits where it fell. Ronald Harrison, the anatomist from the University of Liverpool who took the plate, wrote in his 1972 field notes that the fragment was consistent with a blow to the back of the head delivered during life or shortly before death, with sufficient force to drive a piece of the inner skull inward into the brain cavity. He did not use the word murder in his notes. He used the word significant, and he underlined it twice. That plate has been reproduced in the anatomical literature at least 4 times since 1972. What has not been reproduced with the same frequency is the second plate in the same series, Liverpool Series G, Exposure 7. That plate shows the same skull from a different angle. It shows a second area of interest, and Harrison did not describe it in his 1972 publication. He described it in a private letter to a colleague at the British Museum in 1974. The letter is held in the museum's institutional archive under Acquisitions Correspondence, 1974, Box 11. Harrison writes that the second area is not compatible with accidental injury. He writes, in his own words, that it looks like something that was done to him by someone who had access to his head. Harrison died in 1983. He never published on the second plate. The plate exists because of a decision made in Cairo in 1968 by an anatomist who was not looking for evidence of murder. Harrison had been granted permission by the Egyptian government to conduct the first radiographic examination of the mummy since Derry's 1925 autopsy. Derry, working under Howard Carter 3 years after the tomb was opened, had done what could be done with the tools of his era. He unwrapped the body, measured it, described the tissue, and produced a report that has been treated as authoritative for a century. What Derry had not been able to do was see inside the skull. In 1925, there were no portable X-ray units available in the Valley of the Kings. The examination was visual. The skull was intact when Derry closed his report, and the mummy was placed back in the outer coffin where it has remained ever since. The tomb Carter opened in November 1922 was the smallest royal tomb ever recovered in the Valley of the Kings, and one of only 2 ever found still sealed. The outer seal had been broken and resealed twice in antiquity, the last time within a decade of the burial. Carter recorded this in his personal journal. He noted that the ancient reseal was cruder than the original. Someone had gone into that tomb after the funeral and had come back out. What was removed on that visit and what was left has never been fully reconstructed. In 2005, Dr. Ashraf Salim and a team from the Cairo Museum wheeled a portable CT scanner into the tomb and produced 1,700 individual cross-sectional images of the mummy. The scan was intended to settle the cause of death. It did not. What it produced was a set of images so anatomically specific that questions unanswered since 1925 became answerable for the first time. The team's initial press conference announced that Tutankhamun had died of complications from a broken leg. The full technical report, released the following year, included a note that 7 separate injuries had been identified in the CT data. Only the leg was addressed publicly. The other 6 sit in the imaging archive of the Egyptian Museum's Radiology Division. They have not been the subject of a single peer-reviewed paper. For a century, the official position has been that we do not know how Tutankhamun died. Malaria, sickle cell, a chariot accident, a fall, an infected leg fracture. Each theory has held for a season and been quietly replaced by the next. What has never been part of the public conversation is that 4 separate lines of evidence, each held in a different archive on a different continent, do not describe a mystery at all. They describe a killing. They name the political conditions that made it necessary. They record which men in the palace stood to gain from it, and they show that the record of what actually happened was not lost. It was removed, deliberately, by men whose own names would later be chiseled off the walls of Karnak by the Pharaoh who came after them. And before we go further, I need to pause for a second, because what I'm about to tell you gets significantly darker, and I realized a while ago that some of this cannot be fully explained in a video format. The complete reconstruction of the deleted cause of Tutankhamun's death, the second Liverpool X-ray plate Harrison never published, the 14 erased lines from the base of the Restoration Stela, the Hittite palace correspondence naming the men who arranged the killing on Egyptian soil. I put it all into a written document. It's linked below and the QR code is on your screen. Now let's continue. The tomb Carter opened was, in every measurable dimension, wrong for a pharaoh. Every other 18th dynasty king was buried in a complex of chambers built over decades to their own specifications. Tutankhamun was buried in what Carter himself described as a private tomb, hastily adapted. The passages are the wrong dimensions. The wall paintings are unfinished. The transition between the antechamber and the burial chamber shows the correction marks a stonecutter leaves when working against a deadline that cannot be moved. The deadline was 70 days, the length of the Egyptian mummification ritual as recorded in the Rhine mathematical papyrus. Someone had 70 days to bury him. And the tomb the burial party used was not designed for a pharaoh. It was a tomb under construction for a private official, seized and repurposed at short notice. The identity of that official has not made it into the general discussion. The architecture matches, in ceiling height and antechamber layout, the specifications recorded in the Deir el-Medina foreman's ledger for a tomb under construction for I, the courtier who succeeded Tutankhamun to the throne. The ledger, catalogued in Cairo as Ostracon Cairo 25504, records that work on A's original private tomb was suspended in the 9th regnal year of Tutankhamun and not resumed until A's own accession. A gave up his private tomb to bury the pharaoh he had served. 3 months later, A was pharaoh himself. A king dies unexpectedly. His chief advisor has a tomb that just happens to be the correct size for a hasty royal burial. That advisor takes the throne, marries the dead king's widow, and finishes his own royal tomb elsewhere. In a Roman succession record, no historian would hesitate to call that what it looks like. In Egyptology, it has been called a fortunate coincidence. The restoration stela sits in the Cairo Museum under catalog number JE 41565. Tutankhamun himself set it up in the 2nd or 3rd year of his reign to record his reversal of the Amarna heresy, the abandonment of Akhenaten's solar monotheism, and the return to the traditional pantheon of Amun. The stela is 2.25 meters tall. Its text has been transcribed repeatedly across the last century. What has not been discussed is what the stela originally said before it was modified. In 1907, the German epigrapher Kurt Sethi examined the stela and recorded in his notebooks that the cartouche in the upper register had been recut. The original, still legible beneath the recut surface under raking light, was that of Tutankhamun. The recut cartouche is that of Horemheb, the general who took the throne after I. Horemheb claimed the restoration of Amun for himself by chiseling Tutankhamun's name off the monument that recorded it. The observation appears in Sethi's transcription only as a footnote in the German edition. The English edition of 1934 omits the footnote entirely. Sethi's notebooks are held in the archive of the Berlin State Museums. Notebook 7, page 41, contains a further observation. In the lower register, below the main text, Sethi noted a section of surface ground down and refilled with mortar. He estimated the removed hieroglyphs at 14 to 16 lines. He wrote that the mortar patch was applied hastily, without matching the surrounding limestone, and that whatever was carved there had been removed before the stela was set in its final position. The erased passage sits directly below the section describing the health and legitimacy of the pharaoh, which by convention across the entire New Kingdom corpus is the section that records the succession. Whatever was written there about Tutankhamun's future was scraped off before the stela was ever displayed. In 2010, Zahi Hawass and a team of Egyptian and German geneticists published a study in the Journal of the American Medical Association titled Ancestry and Pathology in King Tutankhamun's Family. The study extracted DNA from the mummy and compared it with 15 other royal mummies. The headline finding was that Tutankhamun likely died from malaria tropica, combined with avascular necrosis and a fractured left femur. What was not in the abstract, and appeared only in the supplementary material, was that both the femur fracture and a hairline fracture at the base of the skull, in the same anatomical region as the loose bone fragment on Harrison's plate, showed no signs of healing. 2 perimortem fractures, one to the leg, one to the base of the skull. The paper attributes the leg to a probable fall. It does not attribute the skull to anything. In 2014, Dr. Chris Naughton, then a director of the Egypt Exploration Society, produced a reconstruction. His conclusion was that the wounds were consistent with a chariot strike from the left. What was less widely reported was Naughton's caveat, delivered in a 2015 interview, that the same pattern was equally consistent with a coordinated attack by 2 or more assailants, approaching from the left side. The injury data alone could not distinguish between the two. The chariot theory required the assumption that Tutankhamun was in a chariot at the time. There is no evidence in the tomb inventory or any contemporary record placing him in one on the day he died. There is, however, a record of where he was on the day he died. That record sits not in Egypt, but in the archive of the Hittite capital of Hattusa, in what is now central Turkey. Fragment KUB 19.2, from the Bogoskoi tablet series, contains an account by Mursili II of a diplomatic incident whose implications have never been fully integrated into the mainstream discussion of Tutankhamun's death. A queen of Egypt, the tablet says, wrote to the Hittite king Suppiluliuma I in the weeks after her husband's death. She wrote that she had no son. She wrote that she was afraid. She wrote that she would not marry one of her servants. She asked Suppiluliuma to send one of his own sons so that she might marry him, and he might become king of Egypt. Suppiluliuma, according to the tablet, did not believe her. He sent an envoy named Hattusa Zidi to verify the claim. The envoy returned, confirming it. Suppiluliuma sent his son Zananza south. Zananza never arrived. The tablet is explicit about what happened. Zananza was killed on the road. Suppiluliuma responded with a formal declaration of war against Egypt, and with a curse against whoever had ordered his son's death. The curse names no individual. The Hittite records of the subsequent border war are extensive. What is missing from the record is any statement of who arranged the killing on the Egyptian side. Before we move on to the next passage, stop for a second. What you just heard about the Zananza affair is the part that changes everything. But it only makes sense when you see it written out next to the original Hittite tablet transcription, the palace hallway, the 2-day gap. It's all in the document linked below. Take 5 seconds right now, grab it, and then come back. Because what comes next builds directly on it. The link is in the description. QR code is on your screen. The queen who wrote the letter is not named in the tablets. She is called only Dahamunzu, the widow. The identification with Ankhesenamun, the widow of Tutankhamun, rests on the timing, the political context, and the elimination of alternative candidates. Trevor Bryce, in his 2005 study, The Kingdom of the Hittites, concluded that the identification is as close to certain as such a reconstruction can be. Which means that in the weeks after Tutankhamun's death, his widow was writing in secret to a foreign king, asking to be rescued from her own court. She was afraid of someone. She would not marry one of her servants. In the Egyptian court of the late 18th dynasty, the highest-ranking servant of the crown, the man who by every architectural indicator had already taken possession of the burial arrangements, was I. Zananza's route from Hattusa followed the standard diplomatic corridor down through the Levantine coast and into the delta. The distance is roughly 1,400 kilometers. At the pace recorded for Hittite royal envoys in the surviving palace ledgers, the journey took about 6 weeks. The killing, according to a subsequent tablet fragment catalogued as KBO 5.6, took place on Egyptian soil. The prince crossed the border. He did not reach the capital. The Egyptian records of this period are silent on the incident, which the standard reconstruction would predict. Egyptian royal inscriptions do not record diplomatic humiliations, and a foreign prince killed while entering the country to marry the queen is a humiliation of the highest order. What the Egyptian records do contain is a change in A's inscribed titulary during the exact months corresponding to the aftermath of the killing. In 3 separate stone inscriptions dated by their regnal year formulas to the period immediately before and after A's accession, the title God's Father is expanded to include a phrase that translates as "He who has acted on behalf of the 2 lands in the matter that could not be delayed." That phrase does not appear in any other 18th dynasty inscription. It appears in A's titulary 3 times, and then disappears from the record. The grammatical construction implies an action taken under urgent circumstances requiring immediate resolution. Ankhesenamun's letter, if she wrote it, was itself an action that could not be permitted to succeed. A Hittite prince on the throne of Egypt would have ended I's succession before it began. The killing of Zananza and the marriage of Ankhesenamun to I follow each other in the record within a window that Nicholas Reeves, in his 2015 monograph on the Amarna succession, calculated at no more than 60 days. A married the widow of the pharaoh he had just buried, in the tomb intended for himself, within 2 months of the killing of the foreign prince she had summoned as her escape. Ankhesenamun disappears from the record shortly after. Her name is chiseled off 2 objects prepared for her use, and it does not appear on any surface produced during the reign of I. She has no known tomb. She has no known burial goods. She is not among the mummies recovered from any 18th dynasty cache. What became of her has never received an answer supported by physical evidence. In the sequence beginning with her letter to Suppiluliuma, her disappearance is the last documented act before the record closes on her generation. When I died 4 years later, the throne passed to Horemheb, the general who had commanded the army throughout the reigns of Tutankhamun and I. Horemheb's response to the Amarna period and its aftermath is one of the most sustained programs of institutional erasure recorded from the ancient world. He removed the names of Akhenaten, Smenkhkare, Tutankhamun, and A from the king lists at Abydos and Saqqara. He seized their monuments. He chiseled the restoration stela to bear his own cartouche in place of Tutankhamun's. And he did something else, something that appears in the archaeological record but has never been given the weight it deserves. He sealed a set of documents inside a foundation deposit beneath the pylon of his mortuary temple. That deposit was discovered by the University of Chicago Epigraphic Survey in 1934. The catalog entry, filed under the Oriental Institute Accession Series, lists it as ritual offerings, foundation stage. What the entry does not describe is that among the offerings were 4 sealed clay jars containing rolled papyri. The jars have not been opened. The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities classified them in 1962 as sensitive contextual material pending further study. The classification remains in place. No permit has been issued. The Amarna letters, the diplomatic correspondence between the Egyptian court and the courts of Babylon, Mitanni, Assyria, and Hatti, were discovered in 1887 at the ruined capital of Akhetaten. There are 382 known tablets held between the British Museum, the Berlin Vorderasiatisches Museum, and the Cairo Museum. Among them is a letter from Burnaburiash II of Babylon, catalogued as EA11, in which the Babylonian king complains that Egyptian envoys have been asking questions in his capital about matters that concern only Egypt. He asks the pharaoh to recall them. The letter is undated. It sits in the sequence immediately before the tablets associated with Tutankhamun's reign begin. The Babylonian archives themselves, catalogued in the collections at Berlin under the VAT series, contain a further reference. VAT 1400, a fragmentary administrative tablet from the late reign of Burnaburiash, records a payment to a foreign informant identified only as the man who came from the Black Land, the standard Akkadian designation for Egypt. The payment is dated by the Babylonian regnal formula to the period corresponding to the last months of Tutankhamun's reign. The tablet does not say what information was purchased. It says the payment was authorized by the palace and made in silver, at a rate several times that recorded for standard diplomatic gifts. Someone in Tutankhamun's court was selling information to Babylon in the weeks before his death. That fact sits in a museum in Berlin. It has not been formally connected in any published paper to the collapse of the 18th dynasty succession. The parallels between the political theology of the Amarna period and the religious frameworks preserved in the older strata of the Hebrew scriptures have been discussed in academic literature for nearly a century. Sigmund Freud raised the question in Moses and Monotheism in 1939. Donald Redford, the Canadian Egyptologist, revisited it with tighter chronological data in Akhenaten, the Heretic King, in 1984. The observation is that Akhenaten's monotheism, his rejection of image cult, and his great hymn to the Aten share structural features with the earliest layers of the biblical monotheistic tradition. What is not contested is that during the Amarna period, populations designated in the diplomatic correspondence as Habiru were moving through the Levant in numbers that alarmed the Egyptian client kings enough that at least 14 of the Amarna letters name them directly. The Book of Enoch, in the sections preserved in the Ethiopian Ge'ez canon and confirmed by the Aramaic fragments from Qumran, contains an account in chapter 6 of the descent of the Watchers at Mount Hermon during the reign of a king it does not name. The chronology preserved in the Ethiopian calendar places this descent, by cross-reference to the antediluvian generations and the flood chronology, in the middle of the 14th century BCE. That is the century of Tutankhamun. That is the century of the Amarna letters. That is the century in which the Egyptian court was being penetrated by informants and shaken by a succession crisis that ended with the murder of a foreign prince and the erasure of a pharaoh's name. Whether the Enochic account belongs to a separate tradition or preserves in mythological form a memory of the collapse recorded from a different angle in the Egyptian and Hittite archives is not a question this record can settle. What can be said is that the frameworks describing this century in 4 separate ancient traditions, Egyptian, Hittite, Babylonian, and Hebrew, all describe a period of unusual instability, unusual movement of populations, and unusual concern about the legitimacy of the rulers involved. The tomb of Tutankhamun was subjected in 2015 to a ground-penetrating radar survey led by the Japanese radar specialist Hirokatsu Watanabe in collaboration with the National Research Institute of Astronomy and Geophysics in Cairo. The initial report identified 2 anomalies in the north wall of the burial chamber consistent with cavities behind it. A follow-up survey in 2016 produced conflicting results. A third survey in 2018 by an Italian team reported no anomalies. The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities has treated the matter as inconclusive. No excavation has been authorized. What the 2015 survey suggested, as noted by researchers including Nicholas Reeves, is that the north wall anomalies correspond in position to the wall paintings depicting the funeral procession, and specifically to the section where the mourners are shown carrying goods into the tomb. If a chamber exists behind that wall, its contents were placed there before the wall was painted. They would have been sealed inside during the 70-day burial window. Whatever they are, they entered the tomb with the pharaoh. Tutankhamun was 19 years old when he died. He had reigned for approximately 9 years. He inherited the throne as a child. In the aftermath of a religious revolution his father Akhenaten had imposed and left unfinished. He reversed that revolution under the guidance of the advisors his father had left him. He married his half-sister. He fathered 2 daughters. Neither of them survived. And in the 9th year of his reign, he sustained injuries that killed him within hours, including a perimortem fracture at the base of his skull that has never been publicly explained. The men who buried him took possession of a tomb that had been built for someone else. They completed the burial in 70 days. The senior man among them married the widow. He took the throne. The widow disappeared. The next pharaoh spent his reign erasing the names of everyone who had come before him. The X-ray plate in Liverpool shows a fragment of skull that fell inside the head of a young man 3,300 years ago and has been sitting there ever since. The restoration stela in Cairo has 14 to 16 lines of erased text sitting under a section of hasty mortar. The Hittite tablets in Ankara name a foreign prince killed on Egyptian soil for the crime of coming to marry the queen. The Babylonian archives in Berlin record a payment to an informant inside the Egyptian court. And beneath the pylon at the mortuary temple of the pharaoh who inherited the arrangement, 4 sealed clay jars, each holding rolled papyri, sit in a foundation deposit that has not been opened since the 14th century BCE. The question of what happened to Tutankhamun is not a mystery that was never solved. It is a mystery whose solution was recorded by the people who lived through it, in 4 different scripts, on 3 different continents, and then buried where it would take 3,000 years to reassemble. Whoever finds all the pieces has to decide what to do with the picture that emerges.